Howdy, healthcare people. You're listening to the Analytical IQ podcast. I'm Adam Lorton.
And I'm Hyunmin Kim.
Today's episode is bittersweet. It's Hyunmin's last week in this summer program. And Hyunmin,
Yeah.
yep. I want to tell you at the top, it has been an honor and a pleasure to work with you these last 8 weeks. And for anybody listening, before you ask, what about Siamala? The answer is, I feel the same way. I'm so grateful for the opportunity I got to work with you both. COVID really helped with that, by the way. A lot of internships canceled. And also, this is about our/my continuous improvement journey. Didn't give Siamala a proper send-off, and at least on this podcast, and so I apologize about that. But with Hyunmin, we're going to improve upon that.
Yep, absolutely.
So the format of this episode is going to be a quick conversation. I have 3 questions for you, reflecting on the summer, the last few weeks. And I'll start by asking, what's one thing you learned about working on a distributed team? By the way, distributed is my preferred word instead of remote, because the word remote suggests that there's like a central hub, a more important location, and then everybody else is like remote from that location. A distributed team just means there are people in multiple locations, but no location is more important than any other. So with that preamble aside, Hyunmin, what is one thing you learned about working on a distributed team?
Yeah, thanks for sharing the definition. I actually never heard that explanation from you. I'm not sure if this is pertinent to remote or distributed work per se, but I realize taking breaks is extremely important, especially when we're in a distributed work setting, because working from home is eerily similar to being in college, where you have like this occasional meetings with people, and then you go back to your place and you do independent work, and you so it's not like having this office area where everyone's like working on the same thing. It has a lot more agency, but at the same time, it's so easy to bog yourself down into this endless rabbit hole of work, work, work. Yeah, so that's one thing that I realized. So distributed work is not just about like the work being distributed from the headquarter to the endpoint. It's also about distributing stuff among, say, me and Siamala and within my life. Yeah, so this was a very educational experience in that sense.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. When you take a break, what are some of your preferred break time activities?
I try to go outside as much as possible, but since I make myself take a shower every time I go outside and come back, there's a little psychological barrier for me to go outside. So I usually cook something really quick, like snack on them, or I have a piano actually in my apartment that I got from Craigslist. So I occasionally play that. Sometimes I just like chat with my friends if they're available. Yeah. Oh, I also started reading for fun, which is a huge change. I haven't done that in the past 4 years. So I'm happy about it.
Any recreational reading recommendations?
Oh, actually, the book that I just finished reading happens to be one of my favorite so far. It's called A Three-Body Problem by a Chinese author called Cixin Liu. It's Cixin, and their last name is Liu. And it's a sci-fi novel about extraterrestrial life, and it was so refreshing. Can I just talk about it now?
Yeah.
Okay, you can cut it out if it's not relevant. It's about this extraterrestrial life starting to communicate with Earth, and it wasn't a typical sci-fi novel because it's not just about, like UFOs and laser bombs flying around. It was a super realistic rendition of how two civilizations can strategize and communicate with super sparse information, because this other civilization called Trisolaris is advanced, but they're not too advanced. So each round of communication between the two civilizations take several thousand light hours. So they're both working with sparse information. It's a war of technology, but it's also an intense game of psychology. Like they have tens of thousands of hours between each new information. So they have to like strategize really smartly. Um, yeah, so it's almost like a thriller too. Yeah, so I really enjoyed reading it. It's a trilogy, so I have two more books to go, which makes me really happy. Yeah, highly recommend.
Awesome. No, I'm going to have to check that out. It's a shame they couldn't get any better endorsements for the book. I'm only seeing that Barack Obama and George R. R. Martin had quotes
Oh
on the
my
cover
god.
of it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it
seems to be
deserves
pretty
it.
well
It deserves
respected.
it. Yes.
All right, I'm into that. So the three body problem by Liu Cixin. All right.
Oh my god, your pronunciation was on point.
So the one thing I could do right in Chinese. All right. My answer to the question. All right. What is one thing you learned about working distributed? Oh, by the way, before I answer the question myself, I'm going to underscore. I agree. Taking breaks, super important. And this is something even 10 years into distributed work, I still struggle with and I still work to improve is creating a clear delineation between when I'm on and when I'm off, when I'm at work and when
Right.
I'm at home. And easier said than done.
Yeah, and I think that physical separation from home when you're at work really adds to that on and off
Yeah.
action because we can't like go on and off like on demand, and we need some kind of like change in the ambience to do that. So like having that whole thing within me, I think it's pretty hard.
Absolutely. Yeah. Environmental cues are,
That was so much better explanation than mine.
no, that's one important ingredient, environmental cues. I agree.
Mhm.
So I'll tell you from a management angle, I actually found that giving feedback is really tough in a distributed team. You know, as a manager, I think any manager would say you want to give a high ratio of encouraging feedback versus corrective feedback. You don't want every time your people open up a message from you for it to be a bummer, like, oh, you did this wrong again. That would be super demotivational. But yet at the same time, one of the most important principles of distributed work is asynchronous communication. So if as a manager you save up all your feedback for when you're finally on the phone with this person, maybe once a week, or there are managers who get communicate with their people even less than once a week. If you save up
Mhm.
all your feedback for that meeting, then your feedback is not going to be timely enough for the to adjust the work on the fly. So I mean, I
Right.
think to do distributed work right, you have to give feedback contemporaneously. And that means sometimes you're giving corrective feedback in writing. And anytime you're communicating in writing, you have an opportunity to be misunderstood.
Right.
And so, using emojis, and then Kim, I would love your input on this. So I'm thinking of myself. It's Sunday night. I'm reflecting on your and Siamala's work over the past week, and I want to give you mostly encouraging feedback. So I'm making a list. And you researched a lot. You followed your curiosity, even if it led you to a different place than my curiosity would have led me. That was good. You were ready on time. Your slide deck looked professional. You had rehearsed your presentation and your transitions. And as I look down this mental list, for most of these items, I'm like, duh, they already know this. And is it patronizing to put it in writing?
Well, I will tell you that those were not obvious facts for us at all.
Okay.
Um, because, well, we know when we are proud of something,
Yeah.
but being proud of your efforts and your efforts actually like being a good product, it's like they're two different things. So, um, having these detailed comments from you was very helpful, and I hope you don't stop doing that. And I cannot agree more with your point on the feedback. It's harder in distributed setting because written communications, just by nature, are more intentional, or
Mm-hmm.
they're perceived to be more intentional. So I cannot just like ask any questions. I mean, I'm allowed to, and I do when I need to. but I find myself kind of whittling down my questions to worthwhile ones,
Hmm.
even like almost subconsciously. So having that culture of like you can ask any questions, even when it's on Slack,
Hmm.
I think it's pretty important.
Absolutely. And Hyunmin, I never mentioned this out loud to you, but I picked up a pointer related to the first point about feedback being easily misunderstood, especially in written form. I picked up a pointer from Matt Mullenweg, who he runs a $1 billion distributed company. And so he mentioned that actually using correct grammar can be to your detriment in like when you're giving corrections over Slack. So like imagine the difference between capital T, this is not what I'm looking for, period, versus all lowercase, no punctuation. Hey, this isn't exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah, that's a dilemma that I have because we're told that we shouldn't be ruining our language, right? We need to be professional, and you don't want to, miss the punctuation or like use what is that the thing with apostrophe? Um,
I don't know, the semicolon, or oh yeah, use too many contractions.
yeah, contractions
Yeah.
in written words. So there's this inner grammar ranger that's constantly nagging me, but I know that, if I write in proper grammar, it looks like I don't have personality almost.
Right.
Yeah, so I can relate to that.
All right, so that's question number one. What did we learn about working distributed? And I truly believe the future of work is distributed, and so the more we practice the using the collaboration tools and using
Hmm.
the asynchronous communication, even though it's hard right now, I think that's going to pay off for all of us in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one question.
Yeah,
You
go
can
ahead.
cut this out when you're editing.
Nah.
What do you actually think about the grammar part?
Oh, I think that it's more important for the words on. So there's a saying I really like, which is communication is what the listener does. So the more you can tailor the language you use in a way that's going to be understood in the way you want it to be understood. I think that's more important than degrading your grammar. That's something I had to come to the hard way because if you looked at even you may not know this, Hyunmin, even in 2009 in the U.S., text messaging was not the preferred way to get in touch with somebody. So as text messaging is on the rise, you would see my text messages very grammatically correct. It's been a long process to break myself of the habit to where
Hmm.
I'm speaking in a way that conveys the emotion behind what I'm saying less so than the proper English way to say it.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And I could imagine that if you learned English as a foreign language, that this would be a doubly challenging dilemma.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I don't know, it's a hard choice to make because it almost feels like I'm degrading the language where there could be like a perfectly sound way to, adhere the grammar and convey what you want. I don't know.
Yeah, if you want to spend 15 minutes composing your text message, be my guest.
Okay, I take that back.
And your point is well taken. Yeah, it's not a cut and dried situation. Okay, next question. What is one thing you learned about presentations or public speaking? And the backstory here being every 2 weeks, rain or shine, you and Siamla would give a presentation about what you learned about the U.S. healthcare industry. And
Hmm.
you guys basically learned the entire thing in 6 weeks, so no pressure, no problem whatsoever. You had to be ready, rain or shine, for those presentations. What
Hmm.
did you learn about public speaking or presentations in doing that?
This was a very easy question to answer, and my answer is content over rhetoric.
What does that mean?
Um, so, when we first started preparing for presentations, you gave us some guides on like how to give a good presentation or how to be ready for public speaking,
Hmm.
and they all pointed to the content instead of rhetoric. I mean, there were a few pointers about like how to make your slides or
Hmm.
you know things like that, but a lot of them were like, don't even try to speak when you don't know enough about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I do the research and presentation, the more I agree with that, because this 10 to 15-minute presentation is this distilled version of your 100 hours of research, or probably more than that for a lot of people out there. So and it really shows when you have a lot of things to say, even though the presentation is short, in the way you contextualize every sentence, or just how the presentations come together. And I feel like how I speak, the rhetoric and the storyline just like naturally follows if I know what I want to say. And I have absorbed a lot of content through osmosis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in the first presentation, I remember trying to set a direction, trying to set a thesis, trying to like keep the presentation in mind when I was doing research, and had a really troubled time preparing for it, because I had this really narrow focus on what I wanted to do, but then the information proved otherwise. So I have to like change course and do the same thing again. Whereas when Siama and I just like dove into one broad enough topic and just soaked up everything, our thesis just surfaced like just like that. And the time we took to create the slides was nothing near what the time that we spent in the previous presentation. And we definitely felt like things were coming together organically. Yeah, so that's just my long-winded answer on how content is more important than like how you say it.
That's a great point. And right, or would it be accurate to say it a different way, to say that having content or subject matter that you feel strongly about and that you can speak confidently about will create a better speaking persona, if you want, will help you do the micro skills, the storytelling, the word choice, the eye contact, all you'll do all of that better because you feel strongly about what you're saying. You're saying, speaking with confidence from the heart.
Yeah, I think having some kind of passion or emotion attached to the topic really helps. And it helps in consuming information too, because you have to be interested in the first place to read through all these reports and journal articles. So I think they're all kind of tied together. Yeah.
It makes me think of one of the first times I was presenting in front of executives. Um, I had a boss who was a bit of a micromanager. And so, where I wanted to say, look, you guys, there are winners and there are losers in these programs. My boss was telling me, Adam, why don't we soften that a bit? Why don't we say there's variation in the outcomes of these programs? And I'm like, you're watering down my message right when I'm trying to get them to take action. And so it was interesting. And I don't know what the right answer is there. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. But I could feel my confidence in the subject matter getting weaker as as we tried to craft it to a message that didn't really match with what I really thought in my heart.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. Last question. Finish this sentence. If we achieve the triple aim in U.S. healthcare, and I think most people know what I'm talking about, but I'm talking about better experience, better care than we've ever seen, better health as a population than we've ever known, at a cost that we can all afford for every patient, every time, in an environment that encourages caregiver wellness. All right, if we achieve the triple aim in healthcare, it will be because we did what?
It will be because we started to think beyond individual interest. And I am sure Adam anticipated this answer from me. Yeah, so the biggest shock that I had when I was researching about US healthcare was that the psychology and philosophy and sociology was playing so big of a role in healthcare than what I had experienced in other parts of the world. It wasn't like a baseline thing that everyone agreed on. It was politicized, for lack of a better word. Um, and there were just a lot of complications. One of them being people's obsession with having choice
Mm-hmm.
to do everything. Yeah.
Quickly, speaking of politicized, I mean, I don't think it's crazy to say that our political leaders can't agree on what the point of our healthcare system is. Is it to keep people healthy, or is it to fix people when they get sick? Now, you know, my answer is right now it's to fix people when they get sick, and it needs to be the opposite. It needs to be to keep people healthy, to make it
Right.
so they don't need to be fixed. Um, but I'm sure not everybody would agree with that.
Yeah, and I think just going back to the choice part, one thing that really scared me almost was that people seem to know what's good for them and for others, which pretty much are the same thing. Um, but they still refuse to choose or be mandated the right choice because they were mandated. Like they just wanted to be like they wanted everything to be a consequence of their free will, which is fine, but it really makes it hard for a country like United States to have this like quote unquote sweeping actions, have this national plan or things like that. It's just really hard to execute, and it's not because of the efficiency problem, it's not because of the technology problem, it's about mindsets. um, and that's what I realized during my internships. Like, we can do all the data analysis, we can do all the cost analysis and whatever, but I felt like us needed a lot more job done in like activist and lobbyist part, because that's the fundamental problem that I saw.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great point. And actually, so your point about people know what's good for us, and yet we don't do it, reminds me of a quote, and I've seen it attributed to a bunch of different people. I don't know who said it the first time, but it was if all you needed to do was read a book, then we would all be billionaires with six pack abs. It's like, yeah, everybody has access to the information, and yet who makes use of the information and how they make use of the information seems to be wildly different. And so there's all this research in behavioral economics about removing choices can be a good thing, and making just changing whether it's default on or default off, like people changing it so that people were default on for putting money into their retirement accounts
Right.
has created amazing outcomes for people, and they
Right.
never missed the incremental, $266. But they loved having the $266,000 when they got to retirement age.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, if we could use a little more of that behavioral economics and nudge people into just a few healthier decisions, it could have amazing ripple effects for our health and for our wallets.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. I think behavioral economics or behavioral, I don't know, psychology,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's more important than I thought.
All right, now, Hyunmin, it's not going to surprise you in the least to hear my answer to the question. If we achieve the triple aim in U.S. healthcare, it's going to be because we made it so people and companies profit when they work toward people's long-term health. So when we get the financial incentives aligned, everything else
Mhm.
follows, including the scientific thinking, the behavioral health, the behavioral psychology parts that you were mentioning. All of that, suddenly we all have an incentive to invest in that kind of thinking when we get rich, when people are healthy. That kind of a system, I mean, it wouldn't be simple to design,
Mhm.
but it would be, there are a lot of easy steps we could take to get ourselves a lot closer today.
Mm. Can you give us an example of those easy steps?
Sure. And I truly think, and I've shared this with you before, I think
Mhm.
private industry is nudging its way there already, and I think the government is nudging its way there in its own way, which is
Mhm.
getting more providers at risk for their patients.
Right.
So CMS started with the ACO model, and then the next generation ACO model, and now they've evolved it to primary care first and CMS direct contracting.
Mhm.
And before we know it, that'll be the only way for providers to engage with CMS, and that'll be an amazing development.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we see it on the private side. Private insurance and providers are voluntarily going into risk sharing arrangements, and all of that is good because it incentivizes a focus on people's long-term health instead of waiting till they get super sick and then fixing them in the hospital for high margins.
Yeah, and I think that's one good thing about, having that capitalistic free market in the United States. I just hope that the change is not too slow and costing too many lives.
Sure. And right. And this is where I differ from many of my liberal friends, which is where they say, just make it look like Sweden or just make it look like Korea. And, just like you, I have recognized that the psychology is different in the US, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Right now, it's a bad thing because it's driving costs off a cliff, as they like to say. But it doesn't have to be a bad thing because we can use incentives to get everyone rowing in the same direction. And that could be the greatest healthcare system ever. But right now, it's just the most adequate yet expensive healthcare system ever.
Yeah. I heard somewhere that like the more product that you make, the bigger success you have. So like instead of having one big step forward, you could do like 100 different pilot projects, and then there's a bigger chance of you succeeding bigger. And I feel like US might be on that track, which would be an exciting thing to think about.
Yes, and unfortunately, it's kind of just well, no, actually, I won't say that about CMS. I will say that CMS, because the law gives them leeway to design experiments like this, CMS has adopted that sort of experimental framework to the extent they can, and a better written law would encourage even more experimentation from CMS, which would help us find better ideas that we could surface faster. And actually, one thing they do really well in China is what they call special economic zones, basically where we wipe out a bunch of government regulations in this area, and we say, if you want to try something innovative, come to this area with lower taxes and lower regulations and try it.
Right.
And if it works here, then maybe we can spread it to the rest of the country. Hyunmin, I think I'm going to close out this episode, and I'm going to say it one more time. Thank you for all your contributions this summer.
Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. No, I really think you're an exceptionally talented young professional, and I can't wait to see what you're up to in another 5 or 10 years. And for those of you listening, oh, sorry, I should have let you jump in there if you wanted to.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I've told you, but it was a great pleasure and educational experience for me working at AIQ. And I'm actually really excited where AIQ is going too, because Adam has been updating me about different interesting projects that he's been doing. And I would be thrilled to, be given those kind of projects if I were a data scientist. So yeah, I'm really excited.
I think you'll have access to all the interesting projects you want.
You're
a long way toward being that data scientist already. And hell of a compliment. Thank you very much, Hyunmin. All right. So for those of you listening, if you work in the business of healthcare and you're not just like going through the motions, you're actually trying to improve this crazy mixed up system of ours, I'm going to ask you to consider signing up for the email list at analyticaliq.com. If you're on the list, you don't just get announcements when we publish new episodes. You can actually kind of shape the show. You can ask a healthcare analyst and get your questions answered on the podcast. And if you're working on something important, an important problem in the business of healthcare, then maybe you should be a guest on the show. Again, that's the email list at analyticaliq.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.
Thank you.